A satiating sweet treat of dried fruit mixed with an abundance of spices, a bit of flour, and sweetened with brown sugar and molasses, enveloped in a lightly sweetened, buttery, puffy, flaky pastry resembling a present, truly is an edible gift of joy and hope. The traditional Scottish Black Bun encapsulates the season, representing the end of a bountiful harvest, affection for others, and optimism for a prosperous new year. Vikings and Celtic pagans dating back to at least the 8th century celebrated the winter solstice and the end of the harvest season with the enormous Hogmanay festival. Always celebrated starting on New Year's Eve, this festival includes gifts of the black bun fruitcake wrapped in pastry. It is hoped the recipient of this hearty edible present would experience a fruitful year without hunger. I'm very excited to share this wonderful tasting lucky sweet treat recipe with you today. For the ingredients, the pastry includes all-purpose flour, powdered sugar, salt, shortening butter, water, and an egg. The black bun filling includes all-purpose flour, baking soda, cinnamon, allspice, ginger, mace, nutmeg, black pepper, cloves, coriander, brown sugar, molasses, egg, a little Scottish liquor, fruit juice or water, a little milk, raisins, currants, or other dried fruit. I'm using dried cranberries and dried blueberries, which are not traditional but very tasty and festive, and mixed peel. We're going to begin by making the flaky pastry, or what I call the gift wrap, and that's what surrounds the black bun cake. You want to start with cold ingredients to ensure flakiness. Go ahead and dice up 64 grams, which is 1/3 of a cup of shortening, and dice up 75 grams, which is 1/3 of a cup of cold butter, and we're going to place those in the fridge. Also add ice to 1 cup of water in a measuring glass and place that in the fridge. All of these need to be cold to make a flaky pastry. To a large bowl, we're going to add 300 grams, which is 2½ cups of all-purpose flour, and 30 grams, which is 1/4 of a cup of powdered sugar. If you're using unsalted butter, go ahead and add 3 grams, which is 1/2 teaspoon of salt. I'm actually using salted butter because that's what I have in my house right now, so I'm not going to add extra salt to this recipe. And then you want to give this a quick stir. We're going to add the fat now to our flour mixture. If you're using a food processor, then just cut in the butter and shortening using the food processor. Just don't overwork it. If you're using a pastry cutter like I'm using, because that's how I always make my pie crust, because that's what my mom and my grandma did, so that's what I do. I'm going to go ahead and add the shortening and the butter to the flour. That's the shortening that we had in the refrigerator, and then this is the butter that was in the refrigerator. Cut in the shortening and the butter so that they resemble small peas, nothing more than that. Whatever method you've used to cut in your butter and shortening, the mixture should look like this. And that does look like small peas. So now we need to moisten it. Go ahead and remove the water and the ice that you put in the fridge. And then you're going to add a tablespoon of water at a time. We're going to add up to 8 to 10 tablespoons. And then once you've added some water in, use your fork and just sort of mash that water against the bowl so that it moistens the flour and the fat. And you just keep adding water until all of the flour is absorbed so that the dough is just moistened, not wet. Notice our dough has come together and it's one cohesive unit. We're going to divide this in half because we're making 2 fruit cakes out of this recipe. So you can eyeball it or you can weigh it. Once you have them divided, place each on some plastic wrap. Cover them loosely. Once you get them in the plastic, then just flatten them out a little bit so that you have them in the shape of discs. Place them in the fridge for at least 20 minutes. You can leave them there overnight as well. We want the gluten to relax and firm up the butter and shortening so that it takes a little bit longer to melt as the pastry bakes, causing pockets in that dough, resulting in flakiness. In the meantime, let's make the black bun filling. So you're going to need a large bowl, and we're going to sift the next 10 ingredients, which are all dry. So we're going to start with 200 grams, which is 1 3/4 cup of all-purpose flour. And we're going to add 2 grams, which is 1/2 teaspoon of baking soda. Here come all the spices. So we're going to add 2 grams, which is 3/4 teaspoon of cinnamon, 1 gram, 1/2 teaspoon of ground allspice, 1 gram, 1/2 teaspoon of ground ginger, 1 gram, 1/2 teaspoon of mace, 1 gram, 1/2 teaspoon of nutmeg, 1 gram, 1/2 teaspoon of black pepper, 1/2 gram, 1/4 teaspoon of ground cloves, and 1/2 gram, which is 1/4 teaspoon of coriander. What a pretty looking mix here. Now just sift it all together into the bowl. If I've got a few like little spices that are left because they're a little bit bigger, I just put them back in because we want that flavor. And basically we just wanted to use the sifter to get it broken up into smaller pieces. I love to use a glass bowl because as I'm stirring this up and giving it a good mix, I can look at the bottom and see if it's dark or not. And if it is, that tells me I didn't mix everything up very well. So now we're gonna add 166 grams, which is 3/4 of a cup packed if you're packing it in and not weighing it. And this is brown sugar. And I'm just gonna use a fork and just mix it up well with the flour. Get it broken up into little pieces coated in flour. So we've got that sweetness mixed in with the dry. Make it well in the center. And we're gonna pour in 60 milliliters, which is 1/4 of a cup of molasses. Notice how easily that molasses comes out because I sprayed my cup with cooking spray. If you add oil to your measuring cup or utensil, if you're gonna have to measure out something sticky, then most of the time, the sticky substance comes out very easily. We're gonna crack an egg. Give that egg just a quick little beat. I always crack my eggs in a separate bowl so that I don't accidentally get any shells in my dish nor end up with a bad egg. And then just pour that egg in there. For the next ingredient, you have options. The Scottish love their whiskey and brandy, and either is traditional in this recipe. However, since there are only 2 tablespoons of that, you can substitute with anything that you like. I'm actually using rum because that's what I have left over from my other holiday bakes. So you would put 2 tablespoons of whatever you have. You could use fruit juice. Actually, orange juice would be very good in here because we have orange peel going in here as well. You could use water or even milk. I've used additional milk and it turns out just fine. So then once you get your 2 tablespoons of whatever liquid you're using, then go ahead and add 2 tablespoons of milk. And just stir the wet in with the dry. This batter should be dense, it should be thick, and it should be sticky. However, if you find that your batter is too dry and you have flour that's just hanging out at the bottom of the bowl or around, go ahead and add another tablespoon or so of milk or water, whatever you have. This is the texture of our batter. Look how thick and dense it is. It's sticky, but I didn't add any more liquid to it, and that is just good enough. To the batter, we're gonna add 300 grams, which is 2 cups of raisins. I'm using a mixture of black and crimson. I love the crimson because they're really, really big, so they'll add a nice little texture and flavor to that fruit cake. And I love the mixture of colors too. I think it adds to the season. And if that's not enough, traditionally you're gonna add currants, but I was not able to find currants in my store, and in the US they're not always easy to come by. So if you can't find currants, you could use a mixture of other dried fruit that sort of resembles raisins or currants. I'm going with cranberries and dried blueberries. And this is another 300 grams or 2 cups. So this is a total of 4 cups of dried fruit you're putting into this dish. And if that's not enough, we're gonna add some mixed peel. We're adding 80 grams, a 1/2 cup of mixed peel. You can use store-bought or homemade. I'm using homemade, and this is just orange and lemon peel. I have a link in the description below to my recipe on making lemon and orange peel. Super easy to make, just check it out. Sometimes it's easier to make it than it is to find it and buy it in your store. And now just fold all the ingredients together until they are all incorporated. Everything is mixed up. Now you can see why they call this fruitcake a black bun. It's very dark in color. Once it bakes, it'll be even a little darker. So you can see it's really thick. Now we can just set it aside. It's assembly time, so go ahead and preheat the oven to 350 degrees, and you're gonna line 2 1.5 quart loaf pans with parchment paper. Push the parchment paper down into the loaf pan, and notice how it's just all wrinkly, right? We can fix that. For both loaf pans, you want your paper to overhang, but we don't need it to be this crinkly on the inside. We'd rather have it flush with the pan. So on each corner, take a pair of scissors and cut straight down to where the paper meets the bottom of the pan. You're going to do that on all 4 corners. So then straighten the paper out so that the flaps of the end are on the inside. Okay, so that flattens it out for the most part. It's not as wrinkly. And then I just take a pair of scissors and come back and cut off those extra flaps on the inside. And this helps the paper to stay flush with your pan. So there you are. You have the paper that fits pretty perfectly in the pan. And just leave the flaps overhanging on the tops and the sides because we're going to use the flaps to lift our cake out of the pan once it's baked. So then we're going to repeat with the other pan. Set your prepared pans aside. Remove one of your pastry doughs from the refrigerator. Leave the other one in. Go ahead and lightly flour a work surface. And we're going to remove a third of this dough because we want 2/3 of it to be the bottom and sides of our pan. Then we want a third of it to be just the top layer of our cake. You can eyeball a third of it. I'm going to weigh it. And then once you separate your third, put it back in the refrigerator. Then we're going to roll the 2/3 of the dough we have left out into about a 10-11 by 13-14 inch rectangle so it will fit in our size pan. So add a little bit of flour to your rolling pin in your dough and then just start rolling it out. Once you have your rectangle rolled out, then we're just going to fold the dough in half and then in half again just to make it easy to lift up. And then we're going to unfold it into our loaf pan. Sort of fit your pie crust in the loaf pan so it's flush to the edges. Once we put the filling in it, it'll hold its shape. Place this floppy dough in this pan in the refrigerator just to ensure that that dough stays cold. Again, don't worry about the floppy dough. It will work itself out when we fill it. Like we did with the first dough round, we're going to remove the second one and we're going to roll it out into a rectangle, but we need to remove a third of it. So you can just eyeball it or you can weigh it. Place the third that we removed in the fridge and let's roll this one out. So just as we did before, you're going to roll it out into about 11 by 13 inches. Okay, go ahead and fold this one at least enough so that you can get it into the pan and then unfold it. We're going to stick this in the refrigerator. So we're going to eyeball the filling and we're just going to spoon half of it in one pastry loaf. And then we'll spoon the other half in the other pastry loaf. You can adjust the dough as you need. Black bun filling will help to keep it way down. So this is a very thick, hearty filling here. So you'll have to press it down probably just a little bit. And since you have such a sticky filling, just take your fingers, dip them in a little bit of water, and then just go back and press down your loaf just a little bit, just so that it's flush with the pastry in the pan, and then it really does sort of flatten out at the top. That's kind of what you're kind of smoothing it out, and that's what it should look like. The cake filling is not going to go to the top because this is going to rise some, and these are going to be really dense loaves, so we don't want them the full size of this pan anyway, and so it's going to fill about half the pan. You want to trim off to where we're just below the pan. So now that you can see, we've cut the dough down so it's barely just over the filling, and we're going to have all these pieces left over to decorate. Roll out the third of the dough we set aside for each of the loaf pans, and we're going to roll these out into just about 1/4 of an inch wider than the width and length of the top of the cake in the loaf pan. Both of our tops, or our lids if you want to call them, are now ready to go on top of our black bun. Move your bottom crust aside, then take your top crust, the lid, and then place it down on top of the filling and then press it within the bottom pie dough to where they're touching, just like that. If you wanted to go back and then trim it just to clean it up a bit, you can. I think that looks pretty good as is. Okay, and you're going to do that for both of them. And you're just going to add a few holes in different places because we want our cake to be able to release steam as it's baking. All right, we want our dough to stick. So what I like to do is just take a fork and then just crimp down the edges. So just get a hold of that parchment paper and then just press down, because mainly what you're doing is just sealing the two pieces of pastry together so that your black bun looks like that. Take your scraps, whatever you have left, and then just cut out a little design. Since our fruit cake is in a rectangle shape, it sort of looks like a present. So I'm going to place just a simple cheesy looking bow on it and then just put it in the corner and then press it down so then it just looks like a present. And I'm going to do the same for the other. You can also add some strips to make it look like it's wrapped with a bow around to to keep it together. There are lots of options on how you can decorate your black bun, but it's totally up to you, and you don't have to do anything if you don't want to. The last thing we're going to do is add an egg wash over the top of both. So just quickly beat an egg in a bowl, and then over both, just slightly brush on your egg wash, and that will give the dough a nice dark coloring. If you feel like you need to, you can go back and add a couple holes if you've covered them up with your decoration. Scottish Hogmanay black bun ready for the oven. Bake both loaves for an hour to 15 to an hour and a half. You might want to place a sheet of foil over the tops during the last half or 30 minutes of baking if the crust seems to be browning too quickly. The loaves are done with a toothpick inserted in the center. It comes out clean. Loaves are baked. What a nice edible gift already wrapped. Talk about convenience. We're going to allow the loaves to cool completely in their pans before removing them. When removing the loaves, you simply just have to lift the paper up. Notice how easily it comes out of the pan. And just take the loaves out of parchment. How simple. Aren't these pretty loaves? Would you like to get one of these? Already wrapped? Can't wait to find out what's on the inside, can we? And our little decorations worked, surprisingly, since I'm not artistic. We have our little bow with the little ribbon lines. Same for this one, our bow with our little ribbon lines. It's not great, but hey, adds a little touch, artistic flair to it. Our lid stayed on, everything connected well here. Got a little bit of open space right there, but that's okay because it just allowed the seam to escape. At this point, you can slice eat the cake or wrap the loaves in foil and leave at room temperature for several weeks to ripen. It is a fruit cake, so it's worth making ahead of time for ease, but you don't have to. We can't keep it around that long in my house. The crust is solid and holds in the cake, even though the cake rose during baking. Oh, you can hear that flake. Notice the flaky pie crust due to the cold ingredients and chunky butter. What a color contrast between the dark cake and the light colored pastry. The brown sugar, molasses, and spices contribute to the darkness. The dotted fruit throughout adds texture, color, and stability. The cake is dense, like what you would expect from a fruit cake. Since this recipe makes 2 small loaves, you can gift them both or gift one and keep one. That's what I'm going to do. If you're looking for a sweet treat to bring in the new year, consider the Scottish Hogmanay black bun and reflect on the year past and the one to come. Remember to sing Auld Lang Syne, written by Scottish poet Robert Burns in the late 18th century. The song bids farewell to the old and welcomes in the new. Wishing you a happy, healthy, and prosperous new year. Slán Until next time, go bake the world.